I wanted to do something stupid that my kids would talk about to their kids. And so I came up with the idea to play 100 courses over 100 days and raise money and awareness for Alzheimer's. That's not exactly how it came out of the box when I first opened the box, but that's where it evolved to.
This is Joe Phoenix, host of the IVI Podcast, where we talk with innovators and visionaries, challenging the traditional definition of impact. And I think you're going to love our first guest today, Dave Blakelock, aerospace engineer, entrepreneur, angel investor, professor, and advisor to multiple startups. Dave's what I call a triple threat. He's built, invested in, and advised companies, and he knows what it takes to create a successful business. He also turned a crazy idea into an amazing fundraising campaign, and I think you're going to groove on his insight. So let's jump right in and fire this conversation up. Welcome to episode number 1 of the IVI Podcast, where we are bringing innovators and visionaries together to talk about impact. And as I said in my intro, I couldn't be happier to have as our first guest Dave Blakelock today. He's an ideal first guest for this discussion, not because of his background, but because of all the various things that he's done throughout his career. And just for viewers, so that you all know Dave and my background, I've known Dave for a few years. We're going to get into how we met, why we met, talk a little bit about our backgrounds and some of the cool things that he's helped me with as we build Gavinga out. What I'm hoping to get across here today is to begin a dialogue and bring interesting people and interesting topics onto this conversation. And what I found in starting a company is that you spend a lot more time talking than listening. And this podcast gives me an opportunity to do just the opposite. And I found that in just talking with Dave prior to the podcast, there are a number of things, Dave, that I did not know about you. And
I'm a mystery, Joe.
Well, we're gonna unravel that mystery here this afternoon. So, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Great to be here, Joe.
So, I said that we're going to talk about innovators and visionaries, and I think those are two words, especially in my kind of realm, that get tossed around kind of randomly, right? I mean, you hear
Absolutely.
it all the time. That person's an innovator. She's a visionary. Why don't we start there? Because I think that there's a real difference between being an innovator and a visionary. And, some people I think maybe can be both, but I kind of got a view of what those are, but I'm interested in what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Some people can be both and they might be a visionary at one point in their career. They might be an innovator at another. But the one thing I would say is that any successful startup company needs to have both. It could be in the form of one person or it could be in multiple people, but you've got to have both skill sets to make a company work. And it sort of depends. If I'm going to go open a sub shop down the street, I don't really have a visionary other than, maybe one on Main Street would be nice. That to me, that's not a visionary. But if I'm going to do something truly unique, I need to have that visionary that's going to set the vision for the organization. And then probably I'm going to need to have innovators that are going to help execute against that vision. And it could, as I said, it could just be one person, or depending on how large the organization is or the vision is, you may have to have multiple people to help implement that.
So I read somewhere recently, it's interesting, and the quote that I'll pull is, visionaries often leave the details to others. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And
can you be a visionary and an innovator at the same time, or do you find that people are kind of one versus the other?
It goes back to, you talk about some different visionaries. It goes back to the size of the vision. So if you take Steve Jobs as an example, he was a visionary in terms of some of the technology that he brought to market. Take the iPhone as an example. That was a totally new product. And he had the vision for that. He could not be the 100% innovator. He had to rely on a lot of people on his team to go out and figure out how to make it all work. And he constantly went, his value was constantly challenging the people that were executing to meet the vision. I can give you an example in my career. The first startup that I worked at was a company called Streamline. We were a consumer direct company that delivered groceries, dry cleaning, video rental, bottled water, prepared meals, pet foods, all sorts of things at the consumer's home. And our mission was to simplify the lives of busy suburban families. And so the vision was set by our founder, my partner, Tim DeMello. And so he's the one who said, we are going to simplify the lives of the busy suburban families. My job was the innovator. I had to go out and figure out how to do it. Right. So I designed the warehouse, I designed our trucks, I designed all of our systems that allowed us to do it at a cost-effective basis. And occasionally Tim and I would go back and forth and I'd say, Tim, we got to take that out. We got to take it out of the vision. We can't do that at a cost-effective. And then he'd push back on me. But I obviously had to embody the vision as I made decisions on a day-to-day basis. But the vision was really set by Tim.
You mentioned once that there were degrees of visionary, that there was there were different levels to that. Can you expand on that at all for me?
Oh, I don't have a ladder chart of the different degrees of visionary, but I think there, some visionaries are so far out there that, that they really got to drag people with them. And so it's a question of how drastic is the change. When I used to teach, I would talk to my students about, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to do one of three things to start a company or to come up with an idea. One, the company either has to be totally new, and so that's really a visionary thing that nobody's ever thought of before. And you could say the iPhone might be that example of that. It's got to be better. That would be the second thing. And then it's not just a little bit better, just 5% better, but it's got to be a step function better. So that company has to, what you're trying to do, the goods or the services, has to be significantly better than your current competitors, or it's got to be cheaper. And so not just a little bit cheaper, not 10% off. You got to be probably 50% cheaper to change the market. And so all of these are about changing the market. I think in the first case, the totally new product, you really need to have a strong visionary. In the better or the cheaper, the vision doesn't have to be quite as strong, but you have. So in case of both those, part of the vision is we're going to deliver this product for 50% cheaper, or we're going to improve our turnaround time, or whatever that case may be. We're going to deliver 1 hour dry cleaning. Don't know if it's possible, but so there's a vision there, but I wouldn't say it's quite the same vision as something that's totally new.
So is innovation more important than vision? I mean, because it feels to me like vision standing alone isn't going to get you where you need to be.
Right.
But you can innovate on something, right, that maybe already exists and be super successful. So you just hear a lot that this person has created this idea, they've built this company, and they're a visionary, and that's great. But is being a visionary enough, I guess, is my question.
No, it's not enough. And I don't think it goes back to your third word, impact. What are you trying to do?
Right.
And so when I taught entrepreneurship, it was no disrespect to somebody who goes out and starts a sub shop, but the idea is it's not about going out and starting a sub shop. So you can be a great innovator and figure out ways to deliver subs better. But what's the impact that you're trying to have? And you may be very successful, have a great impact on your life and the people around yours life. But what we would talk about in class is how can you really have that bigger impact? And so I think you need to have both visionaries and innovators. To have one without the other just doesn't work. You have to have both.
So in, talking through your career, and we'll get into that here in a little while, but I feel like you lean more on the innovator side than the visionary side. Is that a fair statement?
That's probably true. And so it goes back to your, the scale of innovation.
So here's my first learning after talking with you. I know Dave Blakelock as the, member of Launchpad, as, member of Gavinga's advisory committee, as, someone who's been pretty deeply involved in the Boston and broader startup worlds. I did not know Dave Blakelock was a rocket scientist. I mean, I thought you were a rocket scientist with some of the advice you gave me, but I did not know that you were literally a rocket scientist and that your career began at NASA. And it's just kind of dawned on me as we were talking about that, you know, a lot of things that NASA is involved with, was involved with, is currently involved with, aerospace in general, is very similar in a lot of ways to, you know, what small, mid-sized companies are dealing with. There's maybe, you know, the question on vision we'll get to, but there's obviously a ton of innovation. You have, you know, high risk associated with the business that you're operating in. I mean, you started NASA in 1984. You were there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
We talked before that. You went to business school, but in 1986, you know, the Challenger accident occurred. So it's high risk industry. Talk to me a little bit about how that kind of, if that shaped your later career, if you learned anything there that kind of built a foundation for, you know, heading out on your own and doing some of these cool things around starting companies, running companies, advising companies.
Sure. First, let me talk a little bit about sort of the visionaries at NASA. I mean, so everyone understands the manned space, but NASA is much more than just the manned space programs, whether it be the Apollo or Space Shuttle or what the things that are coming down the pike. And so each of the programs that they work on, whether it's going to Mars or going outside the solar system, they have visionaries that think that, okay, if we can put a telescope in space, we can avoid all of the distortions that happen by going through the atmosphere, and we can get better pictures and we can see farther and learn more about the world around us. Somebody had to have that vision. You know, most people would say, put a telescope in space, are you insane? That's not going to happen. So
not to cut you off, the moon, you know, when NASA decided to go to the moon, in your opinion, you know, when we were talking, I said, no, that's visionary. Wasn't that now? That's a visionary exercise for NASA. Mm-hmm. Who was the visionary in your opinion when it came to that?
So the public face of the visionary, and I don't know if it was him or advisors behind him, but that would have been John Kennedy in 1962 when he said, we're going to go to the moon, send a man to the moon and return him safely to the earth. Right. That was 1962 at Rice University. So he was the vision behind it.
Right.
There were hundreds of thousands of innovators over the next 10 years that had to were working tirelessly to make that happen. It wasn't just, oh, let's go do that. And so within each of the areas, you know, there are lots of people working on solving lots of problems to make that happen. But the ultimate visionary was John Kennedy saying, challenging the country, and NASA to go out and do that.
You know, and that's probably one of the best examples that I've seen of really segmenting visionary to innovator. Someone with the big idea needs to then surround themselves with smart people that can help bring that idea to life. And in some cases, you have the same person that can do that. I mean, you know, I was thinking a little bit about aerospace and, you know, just kind of thinking through this call. And if you think about NASA of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and now you think about the space industry today, which still includes NASA, right? But now it's got interesting companies in there like SpaceX, private companies.
Yeah.
It feels like those are two very different models. They're doing the same things, they're focused on the same things, but they have a very different structure. One being big government bureaucracy, the other being, you know, private industry trying to, you know, move things forward in with one eye on profit versus, you know, the bureaucracy thinking about this in a much different way.
So I'm going to just take a step back and try to sort of walk you through the way I think about it. And, you know, so Kennedy set the vision back in 62. A lot of people tirelessly worked for the next 7 years to get to the moon. And over the course of that, you as one of the guys doing the work, I wasn't on Apollo, I'm not that old, but, you know, when you're out there, you are getting some of your motivation from that vision and trying to be part of that team. So it's really about the team and trying to innovate to make that happen. But then in 1972, which was the last time a man has set foot on the moon, which is now 53 years ago, NASA lost in their manned space domain. They lost the vision. They had no vision. What happened was you got, pardon the pejorative, but you got a bunch of bureaucrats trying to figure out how to keep the money flowing. Right. And there was not quite as much desire to fund these big, expensive projects. And so they came up with the space shuttle, which was a series of compromises where they said, okay, we can spend X amount on this launch system, but to do that, we have to put all the Air Force's work on that. We have to put all the scientific work on that. We have to put all the civilian onto the space shuttle. So the space shuttle was really a whole series of compromises to allow the continued movement into space. And that's sort of just what happened to allow NASA to keep moving forward. You wait 30 years, and this guy by the name of Elon Musk comes along, and he has
I've never heard
vision.
of that guy.
Never heard of him. Yeah, he's very quiet and unassuming.
Very quiet,
right? But he had a different vision. He wanted humans to become a multiplanetary species, and so the way he figured out to get there was by creating a space company. Well, actually, what he first tried to do was he tried to buy rockets, first from the United States. They were too expensive. Then from Russia. He realized he couldn't do it from Russia, and so he started building them on his own. And because of the vision, because of he was working with his own money, investors' money and whatnot, he had to be smarter. And he also knew that he had to do something. So in this case, you would say it's not totally visionary, but he realized the economics of trying to put, one of the measures is how much does it cost to put a pound of material into space. Right. So he realized, given the current economics of putting a pound of material into space, you couldn't go to Mars. You couldn't become multiplanetary. And so he had to come up with a better way, a cheaper way of getting stuff to space.
Well, faster way too, right? I mean,
right. Well, and that's part of it. I mean, part of the cost of money is how long do you need to use it and how quickly can I turn these things around? And so, it's everything from the manufacturing process to the launch process to refurbishing. And so he worked very hard on that to make it cheaper to put things into space. And by doing that, then the government came to him and said, okay, you can do it cheaper than we can. And so they made a concerted effort to get out of the space launch business and outsource it mostly to SpaceX. There's a few others that are trying to get some of the contracts, like Blue Origin. But the government's trying to say, we don't want to put stuff into space anymore because it's really just a commodity. It should be a commodity to put a 1 pound package up into space. Whether you agree with it or not, that's sort of where they have come down.
Well, it's just it's almost taking something and turning it 180 degrees upside down and rethinking it, right? I mean, I grew up watching NASA. I grew up watching the launches. I grew up watching that bureaucracy kind of move and watching that whole space shuttle program. And now it feels completely different. It feels, there's still a huge amount of risk associated with it. You cannot innovate without making mistakes. You're not innovating if you don't make mistakes.
Yeah,
would you agree with that?
Yeah.
In the 6.5 years that I've been working on this company, we've made more mistakes than we've had success, right? And
I wouldn't say that about you.
Well,
you're right. You've got to be.
Mistakes are what break you through to that next level, right? And I started out, and I came from a very different background. I was in a big bureaucratic company. It sometimes felt like NASA a little bit, right? Mistakes were frowned upon to some extent. Yeah. Risk-taking was frowned upon. There were ways to do it. And I had to break myself out of that. I had to nurture a culture where as long as you were failing for a reason and that failing was teaching you something, then failing was a good thing, right? Now, you don't want to fail all the time, but, a little failure now and again does amazing things to the growth of a organization, an idea, product. And that's been a hard thing to learn, but critical to embrace, I think.
Well, and if you can't embrace failure or embrace mistakes, I hate to say failure, but if you can't embrace the mistakes that you make along the way, what happens is the people that work for you start to hide the mistakes.
Right.
And that's the worst thing that can happen, because if you can't acknowledge the mistakes, fix them, and move forward, you're going to end up with even bigger mistakes, and you're going to end up with, customers fleeing. You're going to end up with systems failures. You're going to end up with all sorts of things that are not what you're looking for.
And you got to walk that walk too, right? If you're gonna say that we embrace failure, then you have to walk that, and you have to let people fail, and you have to model that company around the idea that failure is okay, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit, because I always thought if you worked at NASA and you're a rocket scientist and everybody on the planet looks up to you, you stay there forever, right? I mean, it's just the coolest job on the planet. But you chose a different path. I mean, you left NASA in the mid-'80s, went to business school at University of Chicago, right?
Yep.
And then started arguably maybe a little bit of a similar career, but a very, very different path. So talk a little bit about how you got into entrepreneurship and what drove you to that from kind of where you were heading in your earlier career.
Sure. I always knew that at some point I wanted to go off and do something on my own. And so even when I was an undergrad, my undergrad was in mechanical engineering with a minor in economics. And so I always knew I would go to the library and I'd do two things. I read Forbes magazine to read about different entrepreneurial journeys. I would read, books on businesses that were started and try to figure out how they were started, why they were started, what they did especially. But then I also read Aviation Week and Space Technology, so I had my nerd side. But so even when I went to Lockheed, I always had my eye on possibly doing something. I worked on a couple of business plans while I was there. Then and what I realized is that, yes, it was a very glamorous place to be, and everyone thought it was just wonderful, but there was a lot of bureaucracy, and it was a challenging environment because of the bureaucracy. And so I got the opportunity to go to the University of Chicago, and so I jumped at it and packed up my car, drove to Chicago from Lompoc, California, and didn't really look back. So I went to Chicago for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I thought it was, even though we didn't at the time have an entrepreneurship program, I thought it was an entrepreneurial place to be, because you got to design your own program and do whatever you wanted. And so that's really what I was looking for. How can I learn about business?
At the University of Chicago Business School?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I took marketing classes, I took finance classes, I took accounting classes, but it was really, I got to decide my own program and really think about things that I would need to later on in my career. When I left Chicago, I actually went and spent 7 years as a consultant, because I wanted to see as many different environments as I could to learn. How does this company run? Where do they get into trouble? Because we were usually brought in when they were in trouble. So it was just 7 years of trying to learn about innovating, quite frankly. It wasn't about vision, it was about innovating.
Were you at a large consulting firm?
Well, having come from Lockheed and NASA and the Air Force, I went to a very small consulting firm. I think we had probably 10 consultants when I joined, a company called Sen Delaney. After about year 5, we were probably about 60 consultants, and we were bought by Anderson, which is now Accenture. And so...
Did you specialize there? I mean, were you managing?
I specialized in retail and distribution.
Okay.
So how do retailers work? How do they distribute their products? I spent a lot of time in the drug industry, spent a lot of time walking around in warehouses, moving stuff around, logistics, all of those types of things. And interacting with the customer, spending time really either in call centers and stores and whatnot to understand the customer.
What was the size of the customer you were working with? I mean, did they range? I'm assuming they were all over the place.
Yeah, they ranged quite a bit. And actually, I'll mention a couple of. I always remembered, I had a company in Boston, outside of Boston, called Child World. That was a client of mine. And if I was talking to the CFO of Child World and we had an idea that would save them $50,000, that was a pretty big deal, maybe $100,000. Then I'd get on a plane. Same week, I'd fly to Chicago with a small retailer named Sears. And it's like, you know, you have
they
to
have a
go.
little building there, don't they? Or they
Yeah,
used
they used to have a little building there. But so, you know, if you were talking about saving $1 million at Sears, you weren't really moving the needle. So wide range of customers, but pretty much every major retailer in the late 80s, early 90s we worked with across the country and even up into Canada and internationally. So
you did that for 7 years.
yes.
And then is that when you took the leap, so to speak?
Yeah, that's when I took the leap. So as I said, we were bought by Accenture and Arthur Anderson, when they were tied together. And so one of the audit partners at Anderson had this small startup client based in in Newton, Massachusetts at the time.
Oh, okay.
A company called Streamline. And Streamline at the time had 6 customers, 6 employees, and $30,000 in annual revenue. So that's a small client, but he wanted me to go out and talk to them about how to do everything they were trying to do. And so I went out and I met with Tim, and Tim and I hit it off. I loved what they were doing. And so
you parachuted in, didn't you?
Parachuted in. Yeah. I came in as head of operations, vice president of operations for Streamline, and I spent 5 years there building a business that eventually went public and operated in 5 markets. And
wow,
it was a heck of an experience, great ride.
So how many companies have you been involved with in that capacity? And I'm asking, this is not we didn't talk about this, but I'm interested.
If you're not going to ask me to list them, I would guess between, somewhere between 10 and 30.
Wow. Where you were actively, not just investing, but you were actively sleeves up in the business, helping that business grow, execute. All right.
Right.
And okay, so Streamline's wildly successful. I'm assuming that 30 companies, you span the spectrum, right? There were some that were, right?
Yeah.
Without naming names, or you can, whatever, give me an example of one that wasn't successful. Maybe how it surprised. I'm assuming everyone you joined you thought was going to be successful, so you're probably surprised. Just tell me, give me a view on the other side of this.
Well, in that group of 30, there would be a lot of companies that the royal we, went through a lot to try to figure out how would you make something work? How would you innovate? How would you achieve the vision that you were trying to set up? And at some point you go down the path and you say, you know what? Either this isn't getting me excited, I don't see the return on the investment, and so you end up shutting down the company. And in a couple cases, the company had been formed, and it was a real operating C Corp based in Delaware. In some cases, we had customers. In other cases, we didn't. And so, there was no big explosive failure like a rocket. But there were a lot of little fizzle out. And, one day you just wake up and you walk into the office and you go, you know what? I don't think this is going to work. Right. And so maybe you've got 1 or 2 people working for you and you all agree, you know what, let's go figure out something else. And so there were other examples where, maybe we sold assets to an acquirer. There's all sorts of different ways to wind down a business when you decide it's not. Obviously, I couldn't have spent 10 years at 30 different companies. And some companies I just parachuted in to help the visionary CEO figure out how to innovate. And so they may be successful. Then after 6 months, I'd leave, or after 3 weeks, I'd leave. But so when you're talking about how many companies I've been involved in, some of those are simple companies like that.
Okay, so entrepreneurs tend to whistle by this graveyard, but I'll walk inside and ask this question. How do you know when to shut it down? I mean, are there they're obvious indicators, right? You have a product that customers aren't buying, you're not generating revenue, etc. But, you wake up that morning and say to yourself, this isn't working, right? Mm-hmm. How do you get there? And, then what do you do, I guess, is my question.
I wish I had a real simple, clean rule of thumb for you, Joe. But unfortunately, there is not such a thing. And part of the reason is we just talked about how you have to celebrate failure. Right. And so the question is, when you're sitting there and you're saying, it doesn't seem to be working, And so often we read in the business press about this guy who had this idea, and then he pivoted to this other idea, and then he pivoted to a third idea, and now he's successful. Should he have stopped after the first pivot? Should he have stopped before the first pivot? It's hindsight is 2020. And so
Right.
the lonely job of the CEO is, am I not getting the feedback that I need from the marketplace, from the customers, from the investors, from the suppliers, from
the people who work for me,
the people who work for me,
Right.
and in addition, you may have to abandon the vision. You may have to shut down the company because the market just isn't ready for you. I think you have to walk the walk. And when you've decided to close the company or shut it down, you got to get up the next morning and you got to figure out what's next. You got to,
brush yourself off and
right. And go out
get
and
ready
figure
to
out,
do it
okay.
all over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that part of your career spanned 20 years, 15 years,
No,
somewhere in there. I mean,
yeah,
where
25 to 25
you're
to 30
active,
years.
you're
I'm old,
operating.
Joe.
Right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
we won't go there, but you're active, you're operating, right? Doing all those things. And then, you get to a point in your career where you've been there and done that. You could have cashed it in and retired. You could have gone and played golf. I've seen your golf game, so that's probably not an option. Nope. At least not every day. And we'll get to that in a minute. But you chose instead to kind of jump back in this it was almost another kind of teaching type of structure, right? You join Launchpad, start working with companies. Tell me a little bit about how you made that move. I mean, it seems logical, right? You've had a lot of success. You've learned a lot of things. You can bring a lot of value. But just talk to me a little bit about that experience. And, Launchpad is probably not as well known outside of kind of the Boston area. So unbelievable network here for new and emerging companies. So just interested in your kind of your progression there.
So what Launchpad is it's one of the top 3 angel investing networks or groups, I guess is the best way of putting it. An angel network of angel investors based in Boston. We focus on the Boston area because we want to be able to see our businesses, touch our businesses, and assist when necessary. And so the interesting thing about Launchpad is every member of Launchpad, and there's 150 members, we all make independent investment decisions. And so entrepreneurs will come and present to Launchpad, and we have a due diligence process that we go through. But at the end of that due diligence process, there's 150 individual decisions being made. And so when you think about as an entrepreneur, it would be a big deal if that entrepreneur got 25% yeses. That would be a huge success. And as a group, we could invest anywhere from $500,000 to $3 million in a startup company. Usually it's not a raw startup pre-revenue, but we would be the first.
You'd be the first
major round.
Okay.
First post friends and family round that we would put somebody on the board or have an observer position, something like that to help the entrepreneur out, and then also be able to introduce the entrepreneur to other people within our network that might be helpful. But so, as I said, I believe as a group, Launchpad probably invests. I've been out of the group for a couple of years now, so I want to say it was like $8 million a year. It's like top 3 angel groups in the country. So not, as you said, not necessarily well known, pretty well known around Boston. We have people that focus on Harvard and MIT, and, we try to have our tentacles in the entire Boston ecosystem. But,
I think that anybody who's been in the entrepreneurial world or has talked to investors, I think they understand the VC side where venture investor kind of enters. It's kind of that $5 million in revenue, moving towards profitability. You're ramping your business. As an angel investor, what's your ultimate goal with that capital? I mean, how long are you looking to invest in a company, right? I mean, right? I mean, if you had
Yeah.
like an ideal situation, are you making one investment? Are you topping off? Give me a little, it's very,
yes.
especially as you're starting a company, it's very, very confusing, right? Because there are 1,000 angel investment groups just in and around Boston and the Northeast.
Right.
You don't really even know where to start. It feels
Right.
like there's just this massive amount of work that gets done. You have all these conversations. You don't really feel like you're moving the dial. So, what's your advice to a company that's just starting out, that's just starting to try to get their feet wet, figure out this kind of capital market that surrounds entrepreneurs and these small companies?
Having raised a lot of money over the course of my career, I understand the pain, and that is always
it's painful.
my least favorite thing to do is to try to go out and raise money. And not to sound like a Launchpad commercial, but one of the reasons to go with somebody like Launchpad is they have the capacity, the individual members have the capacity to participate in multiple rounds. And we tend to, even when you go out to a VC round, we will be at the table wanting our pro rata share, saying, okay, we want to continue to support this company. And so we want to continue to invest going forward. Having said that, it takes a lot to get into Launchpad. It takes a lot to get through our screen and not only get to the screen to present, but really get through the screen to get an investment. And so, we at Streamline, we had a saying that, the man drowning in quicksand doesn't question the hand that's helping him get out. And so as an entrepreneur, you're going to be a little bit, you're going to take money from wherever you can get it. But you obviously want to try to get it from places that are going to continue to support you going forward. And so the best thing you can do as an entrepreneur is try to check references on the people you're getting money from to make sure that they are, if they have invested with other entrepreneurs, how have they supported those other entrepreneurs? Or conversely, making sure they're not trying to force you to make a transaction so they can get their money out before it makes sense for the business. So,
it's funny because, the adage in this world is that raising money is painful. And raising money is, I guess, painful. Yeah. Painful is a good word. That doesn't mean that raising money is not a super productive part of what you're doing. I mean, I find talking to investors is painful for the main reason that investor is going to tell you exactly what they think about your idea, right? You can go talk to your friends and family about your idea all the time and you walk away feeling like you're the brightest person on the planet. You go have a conversation with an investor and that investor will show you 5 or 6 things that you haven't thought about that are problematic around this idea. And you can either fight that and say, they don't understand what they're doing, or you can embrace that and really start to think about it. I mean, I have in the 7 or 8 years that I've been doing this, I can't tell you how many different investor groups I've talked to, from these quick 30-minute calls that you have that allow you to really hone your message, to a little bit more deep dive where they start, asking you things that you should have answers to that now they're asking you something that you don't. I mean, it's a trial by fire that's painful, but if you embrace it, I feel like investors are the best way to advance your company through some of these early stages if you're willing to accept that feedback.
I would disagree with you only in the word best. I don't think they're the best way. I think the customers are the best way.
Is the best
and
way.
trying to understand what they're going through and trying to empathize with them. Investors, I think, in many cases, their feedback is great. In other cases, they just don't understand the vision. They just don't get it. And so if you find yourself following an investor that doesn't get it, then you're wasting cycles. But I agree with you that investors can be a very helpful resource in terms of they're forcing you to think about something because they're looking at it differently than you are. They're trying to figure out, how am I going to get my money back? How am I going to get my money back with a substantial return? They're not doing it for fun. Whereas,
well, I want to let you know this will be your last podcast with me because we talked about you not disagreeing with me in this hour, and you've just violated that rule. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's get something into the market and get that feedback coming directly from the customer. But I think that I continue to pull valuable insights from the people that own the company, or they look at your company differently than you look at it, right? I'm looking at it from how are we growing revenues? How are we executing? How are we building? What's that marketplace look like? And then you have someone with, a seasoned financial background that's been there and done that before, that's holding you to account around key metrics that are important, absolutely, that you need to follow and you need to understand. And, challenging you to kind of balance both sides of that. I think it's super important.
And I would just say, there's a difference between a potential investor, which is what I was referring to, and a current investor.
Right.
And at the same time, a current investor doesn't always see what you see.
Right.
But a potential investor, they can shoot holes in anything. They've got no skin in the game. Your current investors, you have to listen to them a little more and maybe disagree with them on certain points, but they will help you understand, you got to have empathy for what are they trying to get out of this? And,
sure.
And so how do we get to that point? We always know, and we're trying to get to the point where someday we can get liquidity. And so what are we doing to get there? And you're like, but you didn't see that great new widget we put on the website? Yeah, but how is that? And so when I was at Streamline, we had this thing that we referred to as value influencing milestones. So that was a term that we came up with that we use with our investors all the time. What are the things that we are doing that are going to impact the value of this organization? And so if, that widget on the website is not going to impact the value of the organization, but opening up in a secondary market, that's going to impact the value of our organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Super interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay. So last segment, we're going to talk a little bit about impact, because impact is important. And
very.
Impact can mean a lot of different things. Your and my relationship started around impact, right?
Yeah.
I have a book up here because not only are you a rocket scientist, you're an author as well.
Very famous author.
By the way, yeah, well, you're famous. That's signed. So I'm going to start taking bids on eBay here after this conversation. I'm thinking the value of that thing's going up. But Dave and I met before Gavinga was even really Gavinga. And I can't remember who introduced us. I think you reached out to me.
I did.
After you told me what you were doing, I hung the phone up and said, that guy's crazy. And the reason that I said that guy's crazy is because I am a golfer, and I don't think, we all laugh. We talk about people being good golfers and bad golfers. Unless you're a PGA Tour player, you are a bad golfer. You hit bad golf shots. It's a frustrating sport. It's so frustrating that my wife refuses to play it. I said, why don't you play golf? She goes, I don't play any sport that makes me feel bad about myself. I said, okay, fair enough. We both be playing golf together. But talk a little bit about the 100 days, 100 courses and how that idea came to fruition, because it's a crazy idea. And playing 100 courses in 100 days, as fun as that sounds, is not fun. That is a lot of work. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, first I'll talk about how we did meet. So I had the idea for 100 days, 100 courses, and I was trying to figure out, how do I innovate? How do I execute on this? What do I need to put in place? And I knew in order to have an impact, I was going to try to do two things. And I got my two goals off of the Alzheimer's Association website. One was to increase awareness of Alzheimer's disease, and the second was to raise money for it. And so as I was raising money, I know that dealing with nonprofits and donations and things like that as a private citizen is problematic. And I didn't want to end up in jail if, walk off the golf course and go to jail because I was evading tax laws. So I was talking to an attorney about how can I legally take a donation so that people who are donating the money can have a tax deduction, but then, not go to jail because I'm going to donate them. It's just going to be a pass through. And he told me, well, there's this thing called a 501c3. You can set one up, but to set one up is going to take you 12 to 18 months. It's going to cost you $30,000 to $50,000. I'm like, well, that sort of defeats the purpose. So, but he said, you might want to talk to this guy, Joe Phoenix. He's doing some stuff in this area. And so that's why we met. So back to how I started 100 days, 100 courses. It was an idea that said, I wanted to do something stupid that my kids would talk about to their kids. And so I came up with the idea to play 100 courses over 100 days and raise money and awareness for Alzheimer's. That's not exactly how it came out of the box when I first opened the box, but that's where it evolved to. And it evolved there because, as I was thinking about how to do it, didn't want to just be the crazy guy out there on the golf course, but that's who I was. And one of the things I did when you think about when you start a company, I didn't tell anybody I was doing this until I was committed to it. So I had to go through a whole process of, okay, what's it going to take to do it? How can I raise money? Can my body physically handle it? Is my wife going to divorce me? And only when I could answer all those questions did I start to go out and tell people that I was going to do this. And it took me 6 months from the time I had the idea, actually 6+, until I actually teed off the first ball on March 14th. So it was a long process to try to get it together. And during that process, I went out and I solicited sponsors. It
was 2019, right?
2019, yeah. 2019, I teed off on March 14th, 2019.
Right.
And so it was, there was a lot of work going into it. So, obviously I talked to my wife about it and I talked to my kids about it a little bit. But when I would talk to a couple of people, and actually I talked to a couple of PGA professionals, like, how many days in a row of golf have you played or would you play? Like, a couple of guys say, 7. Yep. And so.
And 7's insane. I mean,
yeah.
Just for the listeners out there who are not golfers, right? I love the game of golf. I've played golf my entire life. It was one of the first sports that I learned playing. After I've played 3 rounds in a row, I want to break every club in my bag, throw them in the trunk, and never see them again. Now, that only lasts for maybe 4 or 5 days.
Right.
But the idea of getting up and playing a round of golf every single day for 100 straight days, starting on the West Coast and coming to the East Coast, is insane. And, it's an incredible feat when you really sit down and think about it.
Well, so one of the things that I did before I went and started going out to sponsors and whatnot, I figured I could make all that happen. Yeah. And I went out and I said, I'm going to take 10 days in and around the Boston area, and I'm going to play 10 rounds of golf. But I'm going to make sure that each course is at least an hour away from my house because the 100 days included a lot of driving. So I drove up to New Hampshire and played golf and drove back and drove out to the Cape and drove back. And I figured if my body could handle that, if I could handle 10 days, what's 100? So, because everyone would say, how's your body going to handle it?
10 times 10 is what
I know. Yeah. Well, but everyone's saying, how's your body going to handle it? So that was really how I decided, okay, I got 10. I feel good. I'm going to start talking about this. And that was when, it as an entrepreneur, at some point you have to go public.
You put it out into the real world.
Right.
It's real. That's right.
And that's when you have to be, that's when you are committed. When you go public with it, that's when you're committed. And so that, I started going out in public, talking to sponsors, talking to different folks about it. And so, but I had those 10 days under my belt.
What was the high point? What was one thing you remember about that trip?
Oh God.
And then conversely, what was the lowest point that you had on that thing?
There's way too many high points to talk about. I mean, I played on some incredible golf courses. I played with, it was, like everybody in my life rallied around this when I went public with it. And I started saying, here's where I'm going. So I had people from elementary school fly out to play golf with me. If I was in their town, I was in Washington, D.C., and I played with a guy that I hadn't seen in 35 years. It's just people from every job I'd ever worked at would come out to play with me. People from college. It was just incredible all over the place. So I had a lot of high points, and I don't want to point to any one because, if you think about some of the courses I played at TPC Sawgrass. I played at Wilshire Country Club. I played at Quintera. Yeah. It's just, I could go on and on and on. So, and I met incredible people across the country. Oh,
Well, one of the ones I believe you either told me or I read about was, and talk about the purple ball, because there was a story about you met I believe you met a woman somewhere, and she had been you take it from there if you recall what I'm talking about.
I'm thinking I know what you're talking about. I was outside of Bullhead City, Nevada, right across into, I guess it's Arizona, across the river there. And one of my sponsors was a company called TF by the PGA Tour. And so they provided a foursome at every course. And so I would show up and people would donate to play with me. And so when I showed up at the course, I went to either the GM or the head pro and talk about who I was, why I was there, their relationship with Tee-Off. In fact, the Tee-Off was sponsoring me just to try to set the ground and do a little advertisement. So I went into the GM's office at this course, and he wasn't there, but his assistant was there, and she was sitting there. And so I started explaining to her what I did. And she said, my mom has Alzheimer's. And I said, I'm really sorry to hear that. And so I would play a purple ball on every course for somebody with Alzheimer's. And I would play the third hole of every course for that person. And the reason it was the third hole was because a third of all seniors die with Alzheimer's or dementia. And so, I would take that ball, I would write the date on it, I write that person's name on it, and then many cases I gave it to the person. So I asked this woman, I said, would you mind if I played a purple ball for your mom today? And she got up out of her chair and she gave me the biggest hug and said, that would be great. So I went out and played. I came back when I was done with my round, came back, I'd written her mom's name on it, written the date on it, and I came back and said, I want you to have this. And she started to cry. And so those,
And I read the book that she put that up on the it's still there. Right.
So the high moments are probably 100 high moments of different people that I played balls for. Maybe there's only 75 where I actually got to meet somebody around it, because I would play for celebrities and things like that. But so when I wrote the book, and I wrote the book during COVID, I reached out to her and I said, just curious, do you mind? I have a picture. I said, do you mind if I mention this in the book? And she said, I would love it. And I still have the ball on my desk. And I said, well, you send me a picture of that ball. So so I believe in the book, there's a picture of her in the ball. And so there are, probably 50 to 75 people out there that have a purple ball that I played over the course of the 100 days for one of their loved ones. I was in Sonora, and there was somebody from Callaway that I played for her grandmother, and I know her parents lived in Sonora. So after I played, I texted her and said, okay, where do your parents live? I want to leave the ball in their mailbox. And so I drove through Sonora and left the ball in the mailbox. And there was somebody I met, 2 years later that I'd known her, and I played one of the first balls on the third day for her dad. I didn't see her for another 2 years, but when I saw her, I gave her the ball, and she still has the ball on her desk. So,
I mean, it's an incredible story. How many states did you touch? You didn't touch them all, but you touched a lot of them.
I touched 28 states. I drove 14,000 miles. I lost 198 balls. So, yeah.
One thing you mentioned to me, I meant to ask you this, is that you said you did this in a rental car?
Yeah.
Did you rent the car? How do the logistics of renting a car and driving it 14,000 miles and then turning it back into the dealership work? So I'm assuming you rent it in California and you turn it.
Yeah.
Just to help. That's what these things that keep me awake at night. Just so you know.
Well, what I learned, I went on the website and I said, I'm going to pick up here, I'm going to drop off here on these dates. And I learned that it was, like $6,000, which is cheaper than me shipping my car out there and putting 14,000 miles on my car. And so I'm in the middle of this. I'm in Texas, probably, 37 days in. And somebody said to me, I was talking about the trip. They said, well, you can't rent a car for more than 30 days at a time. I'm like, well, nobody told me that. National Car Rental didn't tell me that. And so I started calling my insurance agent, started calling National Car Rental, and said, oh yeah, well, yeah, you can't rent it for more than 60 days out of 2 months. So I said, okay, well, I'll drop the car off and I'll pick up another one. I'll swing by the airport, drop it off and pick up another one. No, you have to have a 24-hour period where you don't have a car. So I actually,
all right. So
I drove to
the problem.
Yeah, I'm looking at my calendar. I'm like, okay, well, I'll be in Ponte Vedra at day 53. So I can drop off a car at Jacksonville Airport, go play golf for a day, come back to Jacksonville Airport a day later, pick up a second car, and then continue on the journey. So that's what I did.
So it wasn't one car. Okay.
It wasn't one car. It was two cars. They were both RAV4s because I had gotten talking about innovators and having systems, like the back of that car, I knew where everything was in the back of the car, where to put my clubs, where to put extra balls, where to put, my clothes, everything. Dirty clothes, clean clothes, had it all down for pat.
Incredible story. And the symbolism of that, I mean, so much of making an impact and having an impact is the symbolism associated with that. And I thought that purple ball and playing that purple ball in the third hole was genius. I mean, just it really tied together what you were trying to do. How much did you? Go ahead.
I want to just touch on impact for a second there. So I mentioned there were two things that the Alzheimer's Association had on their website in terms of how to have an impact. One was awareness, and the other was money. And so when I was dealing with everybody that I dealt with, from the sponsors to the people that I played with to the clubs to whatnot, it was with those two things in mind. So I went to some sponsors not looking for a check. I went for sponsors looking for impact, looking for awareness. And so I would go to big sponsors and say, I don't want you to write me a check. I just want you to promote me.
Right.
And it's just to build awareness. I don't want you to promote me. I want you to promote Alzheimer's. And then so folks like Marriott Golf, Troon Golf, Callaway, Golf Tech, even Tee-Off, I was on their social channels just trying to build awareness about this. And so, we went into it trying to raise $50,000 and get 1 million impressions across social media. I think we reached between 5 and 10 million impressions, and we got the $50,000. And so, and
I remember it was north of 50, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a perfect segue into the next deal because, I think a lot of time is spent talking about impact, right? And I'll throw another word in there I was thinking about last night, which is legacy. I mean, people ask me, why'd you create this company? Are you trying to leave a legacy? And, when I thought about that, everyone leaves a legacy, right? Right? It can be a good legacy or a bad legacy, right? But you're leaving some sort of legacy. People are going to remember you one way or the other, right? And so in thinking through that, I wanted to have some control over what that legacy was, right? I wanted to drive that forward. But I think that impact is one of those words that gets thrown around, right? It's like, I want to make an impact. Hey, Gavinga makes an impact. You did this. And I think that there are various levels of impact, right? I mean, it's not, to your point, just about the cash. It's not about the money, right? It's about, people that you touched. I mean, what I found most interesting about running this company is that, the act of giving, whether it's money or time or traveling all over the continent, playing golf and giving away purple golf balls, it's infectious. It's addictive, right? It's part of being a human being, right? It's why, more and more of these studies are showing that giving back and getting involved is good for you physically, right? Because that's how human beings are hardwired. We're hardwired to drive and to be successful and to leave a legacy. I think a lot of people think about that legacy, but that whole idea of making an impact and of giving back is super, super powerful. So give me your definition of impact as we're kind of wrapping it up here. How do you look at it? And while you're thinking about it, I'll throw one more thing on there. So there's success in life, and then there's impact in life. Those are two very, very different things. You can be successful can have a terrible legacy and not leave much of an impact.
Right.
You can, by all definitions, not lead a successful financial life, but be hugely impactful with an unbelievable legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that thinks about those two things, but I'm interested in kind of what your thoughts are along this side.
Well, I don't think they're the same thing, but I don't think they're totally different. There's an overlap between impact and legacy. And I think from an impact perspective, everything that I have taken on has had there's always been a different goal in mind or different impact in mind. From back, well, I'll go back to my consulting days. We would start a project with a proposal and we knew what kind of impact we wanted to have and what kind of results we wanted to have. And that was the impact we would have on the people in the organization. And then we looked at both of those things. When we went to Streamline, there was an impact. We were trying to have an impact for our investors, for our employees, as well as for our customers. And how, probably the biggest impact we had at Streamline was for our customers, and hearing their stories about how we had helped their busy lives and allowed them to better manage their lives. And so, every organization I've gone into, or every project I've undertaken, it's been with what's the impact going to be? What kind of results are we looking for? And so, for me, my legacy is about my two kids, my two daughters. But,
right.
I wrote the book that's over your shoulder really for them, just so that they would have something tangible to say, this is what my crazy father did. And also so they can understand what I went through in setting it all up and going through it and whatnot. And so I wrote that book with an audience of 3 in mind. A few more than 3 have read it, but not a lot more.
At least 4.
Right. So, that's how I think about impact, whether, when I leave this mortal coil, I don't think I'm going to be mentioned on NBC News, but, hopefully I've had an impact and I've touched people around me. And that's really what it's about. I think the number of people that came out to play golf with me that I've touched over the course of my years, that meant a lot to me, because it meant that, there was a relationship that people remembered me fondly and wanted to come out and support what I was doing. So,
well, I was fortunate enough to be at your going away party here in Boston when you and Maggie moved to Florida.
Yeah.
And all I have to say is, to anyone who's listening, if you decided that you were moving and you were leaving an area and going somewhere else, could you fill a room with 50 people, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I went because I'm an entrepreneur and I heard you were buying dinner, but the other...
Yeah. You wanted the free meal.
But fill a room with 50 people, and I think probably more impressive were the fact that at least a dozen of them stood up with prepared remarks, talking about the impact that you and Maggie had on the community and them personally. And, it got me thinking about these layers of impact. We're all trying to make a business impact, right? And in some cases, there's a social impact, but I think there's also personal impact that we look at, right? It's almost like if you can figure out the trifecta there, you've lived a pretty solid life. And if you can pass it along to your kids, your daughter Alex just got back from, what was it, 6 months, 9 months in Iraq?
9 months. It was my daughter Kat. She got 9 months in Baghdad. That was Kat, yeah.
Okay, in Baghdad. They're paying attention to what you're doing, because that is an entirely different way of leaving a legacy and making an impact and, doing something that, is more powerful than just yourself. So pretty impressive all the way around.
But as you undertake any project, you join a committee, you go to a company, whatever the case may be, you need to be thinking about, what's the impact I'm trying to have? Why am I spending my time doing this?
Right.
What is the impact? And so I guess I hadn't thought about it, but obviously my daughter Kat has she does things with an impact, and so does my daughter Alex.
Right.
She does a lot of work in counseling and about to go back and get her master's of social work. And so she's trying to figure out the impact that she can have on her clients. So,
geez, I wonder where they learned that.
Probably from their mom. So,
right. Okay, before we close up, I go to what I call the rapid fire close.
Okay.
And I just got a few quick questions as quickly as you can answer them for me, and we're done. Favorite Gulf state on your journey?
Favorite Gulf state? Oh God, probably California. Lots of different golf courses.
Biggest entrepreneurial lesson learned? So one thing that kind of stuck with you in your 20 years.
You have to focus on the customer. You have to listen to what the customer is trying to sell you. You know, that's the old adage, customer is always right. It's not true, but you do have to
stand. You're right.
Keep close to them and try to empathize with them and understand what they're going through.
Favorite quote?
They can conquer who believe they can.
And who's that?
I have no idea. I always had a plaque in my room growing up, and I don't remember who the quote was.
Best book you've read?
Best book you've probably never heard of. It's called The Real Heroes of Business by Len Schlesinger.
Okay.
And he was a faculty member at Harvard Business School. And the book came out just as I just finished the book when I decided to go to Streamline. And I bought a copy of the book for every member of the organization. And it's about stories of, I'll say, 15 frontline workers at different businesses. And he goes through them and tries to figure out the economic impact that they had on that business, making the case that it's really not about you and I, Joe. It's about the people that are really doing the work.
Cool. Can people buy this book anywhere? Is it for sale?
It's on Amazon. It's on
Amazon.com.
So, yeah.
100 days, 100 courses. Phenomenal. Yeah. I'd call it 100 days. 100 days of pain would probably have been the better, but phenomenal book. And where can people reach out if they're interested in talking to you or connecting with you?
Best ways are through 100 Days, 100 Courses. I'm on Instagram. I actually don't really go on X that much, but, or you can just Dave at 100days100courses.com, golf at 100days100courses.com. Both those work. They all come to my email box. So,
well, I can't thank you enough for coming on. And the only unfortunate part of this hour is that you have raised the bar on this podcast significantly. Yeah. I mean, I was hoping to just kind of wade in, and we just kind of jumped into the deep end. It was a phenomenal hour with you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Really enjoyed it, Joe. Good to talk to you.
Thanks very much, Dave.
All right. Bye.